After Silverfield fell, the grinning top hat had the intel they were looking for. Granted, it was unfortunate that another settlement fell to the Chupacabras, but now the allies of the Vesper Marches knew exactly where the threat was. The Chupacabras had massed in one location, giving the green light to Top Hat to redeploy his forces using his interior lines. Also, over the course of this conflict, the Top Hat player began to notice the op-tempo of his Chupacabra opponent. The Chupacabras would attack, take a location, then spend some time repairing and regrouping their forces. And once everything is in working order, he would launch another attack somewhere. Therefore, the Top Hat player wanted to take actions to exploit their opponent's regrouping phase. He kept his forces back, luring the Chupacabra player into a false sense of security, allowing them to make their repairs without any harassment. But on the very last strategic action, the grinning Top Hat launched an attack with his assault infantry. His troops boarded their Cat V9s, which is a homebrew vehicle inspired by the modern-day Chinook, and attacked Thaumadrift. Recall that Murphy's Misfits, the once-upon-a-time ally turned traitor, had established a security monitoring network at Thaumadrift. This allowed the player who controlled Thaumadrift to see units moving in and out of settlements on Archer Sierra. The Chupacabras had control of Thaumadrift, therefore they could track all the movement of Top Hat while at the same time plunging Top Hat into fog of war. But the Top Hat's infantry aimed to change all that. At this point, I have to admit something about myself. When I play BattleTech, I expect to see battle mechs. However, after seeing vehicles play an interesting and sometimes pivotal role, I have warmed up to vehicles in BattleTech. However, an infantry-only battle is not my cup of tea. Not at this scale, at least. If we're going to do something with infantry combat, let's play Blackout, Cyberpunk, Infinity, or one-page rules, maybe even Drop Zone Commander, but not BattleTech. Don't get me wrong, there were a few vehicles in this battle, but this was primarily a dust-up between some legs and air assault infantry doing the whole infantry thing. Sorry folks, I didn't want to make an entire battle report about this battle. So instead, I made a highlight video. I hope you don't mind. There will be a battle report after this, but we need to resolve this battle so that we can see how it affects the two battle reports later. So without further ado, here is the Battle of Thaumadrift, the Abridged version. A pair of Top Hat Cat V9s filled with assault infantry flying at the nape of the asteroid appeared on the horizon. The Chupacabra infantry scrambled into defensive positions, fully expecting to repel boarders in close combat inside the installation buildings. But the assaulters were not there to capture the settlement. Their mission was simply to destroy the relay tower that was maintaining the security network. The Chupacabras fired at the Cat V9s with ineffective fire. They also spun up their deputies, which is another homebrew vehicle inspired by the Bradley and the MAP-Vs used in the US military. However, this did not prevent the Cat V9s from landing and offloading their troops. The Top Hat assaulters ignored the pot shots at the Chupacabras and unleashed a salvo of rockets into the relay station. With all that concentrated firepower, the building was destroyed. The Chupacabra deputies were able to line up shooting on the vulnerable Cat V9s. They hit, but only managed to take a few points of armor and scratch the paint. The assaulters of Top Hat, again ignoring the defenders' sporadic fire, hopped back on their transports and lifted off. The Chupacabra player did a Captain Picard facepalm and muttered to himself, "What? What just happened?" And that was the Battle of Thaumadrift. Both forces were now plunged into darkness and suffering the effects of fog of war. You know that feeling, the creeping fear of not knowing where the enemy is located? That can get to you. The ramification of losing their intel gathering asset at Thaumadrift also caused the Chupacabra player to make some snap decisions. He was quite aware that all his eggs were in one basket, and that Port Easteridge is now vulnerable to being Thaumadrifted. Those were his exact words, not mine. To bolster his defense, he lifted one of his allied heavy tank lances from roadside and dropped them off at Port Easteridge. He also then repositioned his spy back to the port with instructions to start rigging explosives on the starport, just in case if everything starts to go south. And you know what? Everything started going south. While getting into position to attack Port Reaverwall, the Chupacabra player discovered that his opponent had launched a spoiling attack, meeting his forces on the Dust Flats. And, at the same time, his rear was under threat. Top Hat, with a collection of allies of the Vesper Marches, launched a counterattack at Silverfield. What can I say? When it rains, it pours. Except on an asteroid, but you know what I mean. Anyway, we have two battles to get to. This battle report will focus on the Dust Flats. The next battle report will resolve the counterattack at Silverfield. So, without further ado, this is the Battle of the Dust Flats. Welcome to the Dust Flats. It is technically the route of Silverfield and Port Reaver Wall, but it's flat and dusty. It's the Dust Flats. There are some automated mining facilities that lie dormant here, but just like all of Archer Sierra, it was abandoned and sits silent. You might have noticed that there's not much cover here. There's a lot of open ground out there in ye old Dust Flats. We'll see how this affects the player's tactics. The Chupacabras are approaching from the west, and the Alliance forces are approaching from the east. Both sides will start their deployments from off the battle map. However, this is a spoiling attack by the allies of the Vesper Marches. Therefore, they can get one entire turn to move into position, if they so desire. It's like a pre-deployment deployment prior to the opponent's non-pre-deployment deployment. Was that clear? Let's have a look at the Chupacabra forces. Their first lance of the 1st Meg Company is comprised of a Highlander, a Blood Asp, a Grizzly, and a Masakari. The second lance, called the Red Marauder Lance, has a Marauder, 2 Centurions, and a downed Rifleman, which was replaced with a Javelin. The third lance, the Blue Marauder Lance, has a Marauder, 2 Centurions, and a Rifleman. The first lance of the 2nd Mech Company is comprised of a Charger and 2 Grasshoppers. The replacement Firestarter was destroyed in a previous battle and has yet to be replaced. The second lance has a Devastator, Quick Draw, a Kraken, and the mighty Yellow Jenner. The third lance is comprised of a Locust, a Panther, a Jenner, and a Fenris, which was destroyed taking out a Mad Cat. It has now been replaced with a Flea. The allies of the Vesper Marches has deployed a mixed unit to delay the Chupacabras. All of the units are from Dale's Guard that were brought from roadside and repaired by Top Hat using Top Hat's war chest points. So it is time for them to earn their keep. The first armor of the 1st Lance is comprised of 2 Hetzers and 2 Bulldogs. Dale Guard's 17th Ad Hoc Lance is comprised of a Caesar, a Blackjack, a Crusader, and an Ostscout. Interesting to note, the Ostscout doesn't have any weapons, just a tag. But there's no artillery, so move out, draw fire. The last lance of the Allies' spoiling attack is Dale's Guard 4th Medium Battle Lance, which is under strength. It is comprised of a Blackhawk, a Vulture, and a Loki. Remember, the Alliance is trying to delay the Chupacabras, so their objective is to keep the Chupacabras hemmed up here on this battle map for at least 4 turns. Well, that's everything. Just want to throw out a special thanks to all the Patreon supporters, as well as give special recognition to The Duck, who became a notable noble just to sponsor a Mech Company to deploy to Bluehole and help support House Corbin. A total of 17 units have been crafted by the Knights and Notable Nobles of the channel, and they're all deploying to Bluehole for the last phase of that conflict. Anyway, that's in the pipeline, but today, let us fight over a patch of dusty asteroid. Since this is a spoiling attack, we are using our homebrew rules. Dale Guard, the allies of the Vesper Marches, launched the spoiling attack. Therefore, their forces are allowed 2 free turns of movement prior to the deployment of the Chupacabras. The Medium Battle Lance moved across the battlefield, using its 2 turns of movement to place itself in cover at the automated mining station. The unarmed Ostscout jumps to the top of the rock formation. The Armor Lance deployed in the northern sector, moving along the rail line and taking position behind a rock formation. The Dale Guard is in a pretty good position in and around the mining facility. With the free movement of the spoiling attack complete, we can now start the battle. And the allies have initiative for turn 1. The Chupacabras will need to move and shoot first. For proportional movement, the Chupacabras will need to move 2 lances. The player activates his 2 Marauder lances. The Chupacabra player has already figured out the allies' strategy. The allies plan to stay in cover and take pot shots at his weaker light mechs. I mean, it's what they've been doing this entire conflict. To deny this, the Chupacabra will use the rock formations to block line of sight and sprint his mechs forward, closing in on the Dale Guard. The Javelin is light on his feet, so he only had to ground move. However, this left the Red Marauder's lance flank open to the Allied armor lance. They simply need to ease forward and they'll have line of sight on the Red Marauder lance. So the Blue Marauder lance ground moves onto the map in order to cover the Red Marauder's flank. It's the Allies' turn to activate, and the player selects his ad hoc lance. The Oscout stands still, preparing to help direct indirect fire against the approaching Chupacabras. The Blackjack jumps to the top of the rock formation to get line of sight. The Crusader and Caesar change positions, but it's not enough movement to be considered a ground move, so they stand still. The Chupacabras, for proportional movement, activate the Blood Asp lance and the Mighty Jenner lance. The Chupacabras are aware that the clock is against them for this battle, so he wants to move quickly and overwhelm the meager allies. As for the Mighty Jenner lance, they ground move onto the battlefield in order to force the hand of the Allied tanks. From this position, they place the Allied armor lance into a precarious situation. If the tanks stay in their current position, they will be fired upon. If they move, they will be in line of sight of the Blue Marauder lance and will be fired upon. However, I do want to point out that the Mighty Jenner has learned a lesson or two and breaks line of sight behind the rock formation. The Allied player activates his armor lance. Believing he had a better chance against the Blue Marauders, he wheels his armor lance back to break line of sight with the Mighty Jenner lance, while lining up his sights on the Blue Centurions. The Chupacabras activate the last two units. The Light Mech Lance, realizing they are likely the target of the Allies, do a combination of sprinting and ground moving to tuck into cover next to the Mighty Jenner. The Charger Lance activates and the two Grasshoppers jump to the top of the rock formation. The Charger ground moves, using a good portion of his movement to climb to the top of the rock formation. From that position, they bring more weapons to bear against the few Allied forces daring to show their faces. The Allies activate their last unit, the Medium Battle Lance, and they ground move into cover of the automated mining facility. With movement complete, we go into the shooting phase. The Chupacabras will shoot first, but unfortunately, a good portion of their mechs either didn't have line of sight or had sprinted and cannot open fire. But the Charger Lance and the Javelin of the Red Marauder Lance open fire on the Allied Blackjack on top of the rock formation. Target numbers ranged between 8 and 10. Using lucky points, the Charger and one of the Grasshoppers hit, dealing 6 points of damage. This wiped out the mech's armor and dealt 1 structural damage. And the critical damage was a 4, fire control. The Blue Marauder Lance was next to shoot. The player had his rifleman and one of his Centurions try to finish off the Blackjack, while the other Centurion and Marauder shot at the Loki in cover. But lucky for the Blackjack, the rifleman and Centurion cannot hit their target. For the Loki, the target number was a 10, and the Marauder hit, dealing 3 damage to the Loki's armor. And next, the Devastator, Quick Draw, Kraken, as well as the Locust had line of sight on the Auscout. The player was hoping that no one would pay any attention to the little mech, but unfortunately the Auscout stood still, bringing its TMM to a 0. But it is at long range and the mech had some cover, so the final target number was a 9. The Devastator and Kraken both hit, dealing a total of 8 points of damage, which was more than enough to take out the Auscout. However, it will still be able to use its tag this round for shooting. The Allies can now return fire, and the Auscout uses its tag on one of the Blue Centurions. Using the data from the tag, the Crusader attempts an indirect fire attack. Surprising everyone at the table, it actually hit, dealing a whopping 1 damage to the Centurion's armor. And all thanks to the sacrifice of the Auscout. Thanks, little mech, you the best. Emboldened by that awesome display of firepower and luck, the Loki, Blackhawk, and the Blackjack open fire on the lightly damaged Centurion. The target number ranged between 7 and 8. The Blackhawk rolled a pair of boxcars and scored a critical hit, dealing 3 damage to the Centurion's armor with critical damage to the mech's weapon. The Loki missed, but the Blackjack hit, dealing another 3 damage, which also caused structural damage. But unfortunately, the player rolled a 9, so no critical damage. The Armor Lance takes aim at the now severely damaged Centurion and opens fire at long range with a target number of 9. And despite lucky points, they all missed. The Caesar didn't move much, so his target number will be reduced by 1, and he will try to finish off what the tanks could not. He takes aim at the Centurion with a target number of 8 and fires. He nailed the Centurion, dealing 5 damage, which was more than enough to take the mech out. Last but not least, the Vulture opens fire on the Blood Asp with a target number of 7, and it hit, dealing 4 damage to the mech's armor. And with shooting complete, this brings turn 1 to a close. The Allies and Chupacabras both lost a mech. The Allies need to hold out for another 3 turns to have a victory and delay the Chupacabras. The The Chupacabras know this, and the player told me that he is willing to be delayed here and take a technical loss, because he believes that as long as he's taking mechs out here, that he will be ultimately weakening the defenses of the starport. Little does this Chupacabra player know that Silverfield is about to be attacked. If the Chupacabra player is delayed here, not only will he not be able to attack the starport, but he'll also not be given the opportunity to fall back and reinforce Silverfield. Well, let's get into turn 2. The Chupacabras won initiative. The allies of the Vesper Marches will need to move and shoot first, and the player wants to delay the Chupacabras for as long as he can. To do this, he decides to break line of sight as much as possible, and, if possible, start spreading his forces out all across the map. Hopefully, that will make it more difficult for the Chupacabras to concentrate their firepower and slow their advance. First, the allied player activates his armor lance, and they ground move into cover behind the pillars of the elevated rail. For proportional movement, the Chupacabras will need to activate 3 units. Leaving the mighty Jenner to cower behind some rock formations, the rest of the lance continues to advance forward. The Red Marauder Lance ground moves into cover of a crater and rock formation, while the Blood Asp Lance ground moves forward, forming a fire line out in the open. The allies activate their medium lance, and he's trying to buy some time by moving his mechs back behind the building to break line of sight. Because I mean, that's a lot of Chupacabras coming over the horizon, am I right? For proportional movement, the Chupacabras need to activate 2 units. First is the Charger Lance, which ground moves forward, also forming a fire line next to the Blood Asp Lance. The Blue Marauder Lance also did the same, with a general advance towards the allies holed up in the mining station. The allies activate their last lance, the Ad Hoc Lance, and just like the medium battle lance, they tuck themselves into cover of the rock formation, breaking line of sight. The Chupacabras activate their last lance, the light battle mechs. Leaving the Panther to hide with the mighty Jenner, the rest of the lance moves to hide behind a different set of rocks to give themselves the satisfying illusion of bravery. With movement complete, we go into the shooting phase. The allies will shoot first. The allies kicked off their shooting with the Crusader, Vulture, and Loki attempting to use indirect fire to try to pick off the Chupacabra fleet. But without the benefit of an observer with tag, the target number was too high for the shooting to be effective, and the indirect rounds splash harmlessly nearby. The Armor Lance line up their sights on the last Blue Centaurian and open fire. The target number was a 7. Using lucky points, the 2 Bulldogs and 1 Hetzer hit, dealing a total of 6 damage. This wiped out all the armor and dealt 1 structural damage. The critical roll was a 2, ammo hit. And can you guess who doesn't have a case for their autocannon's ammo? I'll give you one guess. The lucky critical hit caused a chain reaction which ultimately detonated the mech's ammunition, destroying the mech. And after the impressive fireworks display, the Chupacabras can now shoot back. The only targets available were the 2 Bulldogs and the 2 Hetzers in cover behind the elevated rail pillars. Target numbers range between 8 and 11. Long story short, the elevated rail was destroyed, right along with both Bulldogs and 1 Hetzer. The other Hetzer survived the barrage of the Chupacabra firepower, but lost 3 points of armor in the attack and didn't receive any motive damage. With shooting complete, turn 2 comes to a close. The allies lost 2 Bulldog tanks and 1 Hetzer. The Chupacabras lost another Centaurian. The allies still need to find a way to hold the Chupacabras here for 2 more turns. It's a tall order, but it is possible. Let's get into turn 3. Here we are in turn 3. The allies won initiative, so the Chupacabras will need to move and shoot first. For the allies to be successful at delaying the Chupacabras long enough, they only need 1 mech or vehicle to survive this turn. Gee, that sounds pretty macabre, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. The Chupacabras activate 2 lances for proportional movement. Both the Red Marauder Lance and the Blood Asp Lance advance on the allies who are in cover behind the mining station. The Alliance activates his Hetzer, and it pulls back in behind cover of another pillar of the elevated rail. The Chupacabras activate his Blue Marauder Lance and his Charger Lance. Both lances ground moved forward, creeping in on the flanks of the allies. The allies activate their medium battle lance. The Vulture and Loki ground moved into cover some buildings, squaring off against the Red Marauder Lance. The Chupacabras activate their last 2 lances. The light mechs all stand still, cowering in the shadows of that rock formation. denying any targets of opportunity to the Allies. The Devastator, Quick Draw, and Kraken ground moved forward, lining up their shots on the exposed flank of the Allied medium lance. The Allies moved their last lance, and the Chupacabra player has realized he has inadvertently isolated his red Marauder lance. The Allied player seized the opportunity and ground moved his ad hoc lance to add their firepower to the medium battle lance, while at the same time shielding their lance from the majority of the approaching Chupacabras. With movement complete, we go into the shooting phase. The Chupacabras will shoot first. The red Marauder lance all take aim at the Caesar. Target number was a 7 for the Javelin and an 8 for the rest of the lance. And it's hard to believe, despite using lucky points, but only the Javelin hit, dealing 2 damage to the Caesar's armor. I'm sure there were quite a few sidelong glances shared amongst the Chupacabra mech warriors after that pitiful shooting. The Devastator, Kraken, Quick Draw, as well as the Charger Lance and the Blue Marauder Lance all lined up their sights on the Vulture. Target number ranged between 9 and 11. Despite the much higher target number, several mechs were able to hit the Vulture, albeit using lucky points, dealing a total of 13 damage, which was enough to destroy the mech. The Allies return fire, and they all take aim at the red Marauder. The target number was a 7. Using lucky points, only the Vulture and Blackjack missed. The rest of the mechs hit, dealing 15 points of damage, which was more than enough to take the Marauder out. Well, I guess we can't call it the red Marauder Lance anymore. Everyone almost forgot about the little Hetzer that could. He took aim at the Blue Marauder and opened fire with a target number of 8. And with a roll of 12, he certainly could. His critical hit took 2 points of armor off the mech and damaged the Marauder's weapons. And with shooting complete, turn 3 comes to a close. The Chupacabras lost a Marauder and the Allies lost a Vulture. But most importantly, the Allies had units that survived to turn 4. In turn 4, the Allies began to retreat. The majority of the forces were able to escape except the Loki and the Blackhawk. The Chupacabra mechs opened fire. The Blackhawk lost all its armor and sustained critical damage to its fire control. The Loki, on the other hand, didn't make it. And since the Allies had sprinted, they couldn't return fire. But at the top of turn 5, the Blackhawk sprinted to safety and exited the map, bringing the battle to a close. The Allies lost 3 mechs and 3 vehicles, and the Chupacabras lost 3 mechs. Not the outcome the Chupacabras were hoping for. The Allies, on the other hand, successfully delayed the Chupacabra advance. This is when I informed the Chupacabra player of the impending attack at Silverfield. With that revelation, he realized why the Allies were so desperate to hold his army here. It wasn't to slow down his attack on the starport, but to prevent him from returning to defend his rear logistics at Silverfield. His army is now stuck here on the Dust Flats and cannot participate in the second Battle of Silverfield, which will be resolved in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed this battle report. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the next battle.